Hi, thank you. What a pleasure. This session hits many of my interests all at once. As a career-long marketer, I am very interested in our opportunity to discuss today's topics. And as somebody who cares about privacy, I could not be happier to welcome our panel, who has been thinking about actualizing privacy in marketing practice for significant lengths of time from different ethical perspectives and with respect to technical considerations, opportunities, and challenges. So I would like to start by asking our panel to introduce themselves. I want them to take more than a moment to do that because I want the audience to hear how long many of us, not me, have been working on the problem. We will introduce in the order here on our slide, with Todd, followed by Anne, followed by Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. Before I start talking, how is my audio? I've been having trouble. I've been working from my barn here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and it's a little sketchy, but excuse me, good to know that it's working. Look, I am so honored and pleased to be on this panel with Anne and with Firewheel, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a little embarrassed to admit how long I've been in the privacy space writ large, but it's going on close to 20 years at this point. And I've been in privacy itself so long that I can actually remember when almost all the practitioners could fit in one room. So that's a long time. But, I've been really focused on the intersection of privacy and digital advertising, whether it's ad tech or MarTech, as a specialty or a focus, if you will, since 2012 timeframe, almost full time. So that's 10 years at this point. The challenges have only grown, and from a privacy perspective, they continue to be vexing, but they're important, and more so now than ever before. So I'm delighted to have a conversation around ad tech and marketing and what it all means for marketers. But let me hand it over to Anne as well.
Thank you, Todd. My name is Anne Chung, and I am Senior Global Privacy Counsel at IPG. IPG is the Interpublic Group. We are a holdco of advertising agencies. And so my role supports any of the privacy questions that come in from our agencies. It's a lot of education, teaching them about what the law requires, balancing that against what we're trying to provide in our services, and then balancing that against what our clients need from a privacy perspective of our agencies. And then finally, to kind of close that gap is working with our partners and understanding how they're using data and how that fits into what our agencies are trying to do and what our clients are trying to achieve. Before that, I was in-house at a brand at a telecommunications company doing the same thing, product and privacy counsel. And my marketing team was marketing and media sales team, where our biggest clients are being 1.5 lawyers dedicated to privacy. So I've been doing it for about 10 years now, and before that as a paralegal on related privacy issues with subpoena compliance. So kind of been in this space for quite some time.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, my name is Jeff Wheeler, Senior Product Manager here at Wirewheel. I have been in the privacy and advertising MarTech space for about the last 6 years. I was actually lucky enough to work with Todd previously at some point. So we've got a lot of history together, kind of working through, a lot of these complex problems around data analytics, marketing, advertising, and privacy. Also, I've spent quite a bit of time building out products that help you with data governance, consent management platforms, and other other items in the privacy space. Prior to that, way back when, I was a database guy building out reports and analytic tools. So really happy to be here and excited to be part of the panel.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, who I know takes on the hard problems of actually operationalizing some murky territory. So I'm going to.
Camille,
Yes?
if I could just jump in, I apologize for the interruption, but Jeff is a modest guy, and I just want to underscore the point that when he and I worked together at Evidon, is also known as Ghostery, prior to its acquisition, and then it was ultimately renamed Crown Peak. And I was the chief privacy officer and general counsel there. But Jeff had the hard, so my job was easy. I could talk in the abstract often and talk about the high level privacy principles and its application with respect to consent and consent management. But Jeff is the one that actually was in charge of, building out and operationalizing the technologies around consent management.
Exactly. So I don't know which job I could imagine harder on this panel. So I'm going to ask a series of questions, but that should not preclude our audience from sharing questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So the first thing I wanted to call to mind is the name of our panel. Our panel is titled Redefining Marketing's Relationship with Data in the Privacy Age. So I was curious about this title and what it meant to you. What do you, the panel, see as the moment we're in? Are we in a privacy age with respect to how consumers see their data? Are we in a privacy age with the role marketers play? Is it something that's being embraced? Is it a challenging area? What moment are we in? And Todd, I'm going to start with you since you've been here for more than one moment.
I'd much rather hear what Anne has to say on this question, but look, I from my perspective, it's all of the above. For forever and ever, we've always been at an inflection moment, but we really are at an inflection moment, and by that I mean, I have not seen before the coming together of so many elements in creating a perfect storm, if you will, at the same time. So what I mean by that is, look, from a privacy professional's perspective, this has always been important, right? But now, within the context of digital marketing and ad tech at the intersection of privacy, we are seeing an absolute flurry of regulatory activity, whether it is through enforcement actions, guidance, sending industry signals, class action suits being filed both in the US and the EU, as well as a whole body of emerging data protection laws, all of which encompass this activity, none of which make it are prescriptive, but all of which say, if you are going to engage in online tracking for the purposes of digital advertising, and I'm paraphrasing, right? Then you just need to do it right, and there needs to be considerations, and it needs to be thought through, because there are legal requirements and obligations. So it's great to see we're at this point. And again, I don't want to emphasize consumer concern, because it's growing and growing and growing. Never before has it been such a kitchen table issue, simply because it's in the news so much, whether it's through large stories about large social media platforms or data aggregators, but it's always in the news. So people are aware and people are taking control. So here we are at this inflection point.
I'm going to come to Anne, but I first would like to know from Jeff, your perspective, since you really are bridging technology? What moment are we in?
I totally agree with Todd, right? We're seeing so much change in the market or in the industry around the regulation and what's coming down from marketers, but we're also seeing now, especially within the US, these state laws that are upcoming, not only the ones that have passed, but if you look, last year I believe there was 15 that failed at some point in a bill, and I think it's just showing that there's that influx of privacy, especially in the US, that as we've kind of moved, especially in the ad tech industry, away from some of the self-regulation that's been really guiding a lot of that over the last decade or so into now we have to hold ourselves accountable.
Thank you. And what moment are we in?
I agree with everything that Todd and Jeff has said, right? Like we're at a point where, to a certain extent, our former view, what I think of our former view, which is a strict compliance lens to privacy, is going to have to change, right? So it's not just what does the law say and what do we have to do? It's a combination of that with what should we do? Because the introduction of all of these different state privacy laws in the US, for instance, really make that a challenge for marketers to say, okay, how do I apply different rules in California, and Colorado and Virginia versus New York, or do I apply some sort of a principle-based, which is the foundation of privacy in its essence, right? Do I do what the law requires, but also have these principles that drive the way that I operate, right? So I think that's one thing. If the industry, as just said, if we failed to have self-regulated, the lawmakers came in and regulated for us. They're regulating on behalf of consumer protection and protecting those individuals, giving consumers the right to make the decisions. But also there's a challenge for marketers to say, okay, but how do I do that? Because these laws aren't prescriptive. They may not be very clearly drafted, and a clearly drafted law and a lawyer means different interpretations. Todd and I can have very different interpretations of the same exact provision of a law and how that has to be carried out in an organization. So, we're at a point where we really need to sort of have a privacy reset and refocus on those fundamentals, those principles that guide how you operate and how you build that relationship back with users that might have lost trust in the way that, you've used their data, for instance, because there's so much more consumer awareness out there now.
Right. Okay. So, and I think, and the people listening will very much resonate with the notion of we have to have a principles-based approach. We have to have a framework. At the same time, I imagine that as you work with the agencies who you're of counsel to, and as they work with their clients that are global brands, and as those clients work with their partners, there's probably a proactive stream that you're trying to advocate for, versus a reactive, a kind of urgent, what do we do? And so I want to come back to the proactive. Would like to hear from the group, starting with you, Anne. What are the clients' top of mind questions? How do they talk about privacy? What questions come up for them? What seems to be most important to them in this regard?
We get different kinds of questions from different kinds of clients, right? So some of our clients are very privacy focused. They may have a first party relationship with their customers, and they want to preserve the trust that they already have with those customers and give them what they want, right? If they knew what those customers wanted. But you also have organizations who are still thinking about that because they're moving away, whether they're regulated or non-regulated entities, they're moving away from just a compliance approach, right? So I think a lot of the types of questions that they have are, what are your agencies doing to get ready for what's going to come in 2023? How do I reconcile that? And, although I'm a lawyer, I'm always concerned about making sure I'm not giving unsolicited legal advice. The agencies also have to really kind of walk that line very carefully as well, right? What we do from the agency perspective is we engage in our clients in that dialogue. We present them with what we've seen out there in the marketplace to help them help our clients benchmark where they may want to be, because some clients aren't exactly sure how to position themselves yet. And so what we're trying to do is open that conversation with them and really understand what they're trying to achieve. In that sense, then we're able to sort of partner them with the right vendors or partners and the right tactics to also meet their marketing goals. Because in the end, we're helping them market a product, right? But we're also trying to do that in a way that's responsible and fair to consumers.
Todd, I would love to hear how your clients surface the questions that feel most urgent to them.
Yeah, so let me answer that question by kind of taking a step back and say, what are the issues, right? And Ann and I both mentioned earlier that there's an emerging body of data protection laws, all of which would encompass digital advertising because of the ad tech and martech ecosystem, the way it's architected. So again, we're seeing this rising number of privacy laws. At the same time, we're seeing a crackdown, at least the signals of it, from the regulatory community, and we're also seeing significant policy shifts, which have operational impacts by big tech, the big platforms, specifically, the privacy sandbox initiative by Google, and as well as Apple's shift away as it pertains to its iOS, its mobile operating system, to an opt-in approach for app developers. All of that is coming together to into this one moment, this inflection point, if you will. To result in the clients saying, what do I do? It's so confusing. There's so much change, and it's a whirlwind of developments here. And since leaving Evidon, and I was at JP Morgan Chase for a little bit, but now I'm with a privacy consulting practice at Promontory, which is an IBM company. This is the number one question for our clients, saying, my head is spinning. Are cookies going to exist? Are cookies not going to exist? The regulators, they want this, they don't want that. What do I do? And at the same time,
so what do I do is the question, but make it more precise if they can make it more precise. Is it, how do I keep my business running as usual, or how do I make a shift?
Yeah, so that's the big question, right? So CPOs and general counsels are coming to us all the time and saying, what do we need? What are our regulatory compliance obligations? And so we can comply, but it feels like it's a patchwork. There's a lack of consistency globally, and oh, by the way, we don't want to do anything to endanger the golden goose. Our company derives a lot of money from digital advertising, and specifically around focus on behavioral advertising. So how do we do it the right way? So we not only preserve that revenue, but grow the revenue. But it means that we have to take on, we have to take on a new paradigm in how we do it. How do we do that in a frictionless way? Or how do we prepare for ad tech 2.0 in a post-cookie world? That's the question.
So of course I'm going to ask you back how, but before I want to hear from Jeff whether that resonates, how you hear these kinds of questions posed.
No, I think both Ann and Todd nailed it right on the head, right? I think you also, if you pull back and you look at it from really two main regions in privacy right now, you've got what's happening in the US with these upcoming privacy laws, right? And if you look in Europe, where we've had GDPR for a couple of years, and part of that we had old cookie laws. So those questions are going to kind of vary depending on where that user is coming from. So for instance, like in Europe right now, a lot of the questions I get when I'm talking to our customers, or when I'm getting asked specific about things like consent, they're looking beyond cookie banners, or what's the bare minimum I can do, and really what are the better experiences I can do to get more interaction on my website, to get more interaction away from the cookie banners, because I think it's blatantly obvious to most in this group that I think the end consumer really dislikes the cookie banner. It's a bad experience, and if you ask like any UX designer that works on a website, and the first thing that gets popped up on their page is they're throwing a cookie banner, it's like, oh, what's going on? They hate it, right? And so what we're seeing, especially in Europe, a lot of the questions I get outside of what's ad tech 2.0 look like, what's cookieless futures, what are the better choices and decisions I can make with those types of experiences. So not necessarily get more trust with my user, but to show my user that I'm trying to be more thoughtful in terms of their experience. And a lot of the things that, we've been able to see in the past, and some of the data we've ran, is like you can make very specific choices on your banners based off, a geo, even down to a country, instead of just throwing them up, a typical banner. And those are things that have really resonated within the market. Unfortunately, it's kind of led down the path to some of the dark patterns. And I think avoiding those dark patterns is obviously something that we need to do. But you can still offer the end consumer a better experience to increase those opt-in rates and those consent rates, because at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. I think we'll get there in the US once we get a little bit more used to privacy, but as we're still more of a, hey, let's make sure we get compliant, we understand the laws, because they're still new and fresh. And the US will catch up there eventually, right? But those are the kind of the two personas I think we're seeing in terms of how we're operationalizing now.
Thank you. So,
And,
I was gonna say, go
and
ahead.
Camille, if I can just add on to what Jeff just said, what I am seeing in the marketplace from discussions and engagements with our clients is really this shift, and it's coalescing. So it's really picking up speed away from where ad tech has been used and deployed originally in a very opaque, hard to penetrate, hard to understand architecture, towards good governance, good privacy governance, and that starts with organizations, acknowledging these issues, and the CPO saying, how do we create a frictionless ecosystem so we can preserve and grow the revenue from digital advertising, recognizing the heightened security and new obligations. And it all starts with rethinking their data strategy. And as part of that, really, I hate to use this phrase, but looking at their digital supply chain, if you will, to get clarity as to what's going on in this opaque ecosystem. How do we know what third parties are on our websites or apps, and what they're collecting and what they're using it for? Maybe they're authorized, but a vast majority or a vast number of them are unknown to the website operator. And how can we actually have visibility into this digital supply chain and the daisy chain that exists? And then how do we control that? And do we really need this? How can we optimize this digital supply chain so we can preserve and grow our revenue, but enhance trust with the regulators and meet our regulatory obligations? So we're seeing this shift and this rethinking about data strategies, and it's taking place within these organizations on a cross-functional basis, with chief marketing officer and teams, her teams, tech ops, privacy, legal, and a few other functions. And the output is what we will be seeing is the semblance of best practice of best governance practices emerging in this space, whereas we didn't have that 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. Now we're seeing that over and over again at large organizations.
Okay, so I love that you're giving us questions and framework for somebody, for example, in my role as a marketing officer, to think about how we are going to prepare ourselves for the future and really the present. So that's one side. And the other side is, what do I need to do by 2023? And then to square those two, what can I do now that's going to make sure I'm okay for 2023, but position me beyond that. I think some marketers in our audience will appreciate hearing what is new about 2023 and how to address the topic, and how we, as even as an audience member, will know that a company is in compliance based on what we see on their website, what we see on an app. So let's talk about what we for sure need to have under management for 2023. And then let's talk about how we pursue the line of questions you had around data strategy that can both support that outcome and next ones. So who wants to start? Or Todd, would you like to continue?
No, I mean, I don't want to, hog the microphone. 2023, there's a lot of regulatory obligations that companies need to really work towards to, get ready for 2023. We have the CCPA and it's, as well as a CPRA in 2023. We have, the Virginia Privacy Act, we have Colorado, and we have a ton of activity happening in the EU, whether it's, the e-privacy directive, if that will finally get, negotiated into a regulation, but also, what are the, GDPR specific requirements around notice and consent. So there's a ton of things for privacy to do to get ready for 2023, but, let me hand it over to Anne just to, be more specific.
Thanks, Todd. I mean, I think in terms of some practical steps that organizations can do, right? Going back to Todd's point about privacy governance and privacy infrastructure, right? Understanding that so many of us we're trying to apply privacy requirements into existing infrastructure and trying to figure out how to make that work. We're a lot of times we're married to that infrastructure, right? So understanding what that infrastructure is doing and identifying potential partners that help you elevate the way that you govern kind of data use and collection in your organization and disclosure, right? A lot of what's happened in the laws is requiring organizations that process this type of information to have a certain amount of accountability, right, to consumers. And so making sure that their systems can do that is going to be one thing that's going to be very important for organizations to look at. That requires funding. That requires time. And traditionally, the privacy function has generally been started and resides in the legal department. And that may not always be productive. I might be talking myself out of a job, but it is, and Todd also mentioned, it's a cross-functional exercise, right? It's not just the legal team that's involved here. We're not driving that decision-making. The business side of it has to do that, right? So marketing teams have to think about that. Operations teams have to be involved. Engineering, IT teams have to really be involved in those discussions. And for that, there needs to be a sponsor on the business side that's championing that within organizations. And that's going to really drive the type of processes and operational procedures that are necessary to actually carry out the compliance and the compliance plus part of privacy, right? Not just the what do I have to do, what else should I do? I'm not going to offer rights to consumers in California because the law requires me to and not extend it to my same employee in New York, for instance. Like, sorry, law doesn't require me to do that. And I'm not going to do that, right? So you have to sort of have some framework around that about how you're going to apply this, these patchworks, not just in the States, but if you're a multinational company, how do I deal with the EU or, China, right? So you need to reconcile all of that, but that all requires resources. So being able to articulate the importance of that in your organization to senior leaders to fund that, not just in money, but time, resources, people, and technology is going to be super important. I think that's one thing. And in that, especially the other thing that is very practical that most privacy people will tell you to do, and business folks hate it, and privacy, lawyers always encourage it, is just an inventory. Inventory your data. Do you know who collects, how was it collected? How did it come into your organization? How do you use it? Do you use it? When will it be deleted? Who is it shared with? We need to understand, it's not the legal team that needs to know those answers, right? It's our marketers that need to know that. We're going to start to articulate to consumers how we use that information. We need to understand that. So a data inventory, a personal information inventory is going to be something that's super valuable. That helps with your compliance and compliance plus.
Right. I like how you put that, compliance and compliance plus. And we'll get back to compliance plus after I ask Jeff in terms of managing the compliance part, and Anne's note that it's very likely that a marketing team, even though we manage the website, we're the sponsors of the mobile app, we don't know where our data travels to and fro, where it lives, et cetera. How do you help organizations get answers to the fundamental questions, and what are the fundamental questions that are important for compliance now, in addition to compliance plus?
No, it's a great question. Going back to what Todd said a few minutes ago, right? Like it's starting with this idea of digital governance, right? And knowing who you're working with. I think Todd can probably attest to this. We worked with a lot of customers at our prior operations where we would work with them on who are the third parties you're working with. And more often than not, they were kind of caught not knowing everyone that's on their site at a very high level, right? When you take enterprise customers that have websites that are being touched by multiple organizations within their own company, you've got multiple hands kind of in the cookie jar, adding and removing tags, adding and removing scripts. And more often than not, something gets forgotten, or something's added, or something's piggybacked on that a customer has no idea that they're even working with. Right. And I think that's created a lot of kind of uncertainty, right? So, as California's CCPA first came on, for example, there's this idea of do not sell. And what does it mean? Well, did you also know that you're sharing this data with these third parties, or even with other tags within the same company that you didn't know on that site? And so I think that's kind of where you really need to start, as you're getting ready for 2022 or 2023 is, start with that data governance and kind of plan for what you don't know. And then the last part I would just say is be ready for the unknown. Between now and then, not only is there going to be a lot more state laws, but if you look at what's happened in Europe in the last year, you've had 3 different regulators come out with specific requirements, around how consent has to work or how compliance has to work. And you've had rulings like Planet 49 that have all dictated major things, and it happens almost quarterly at this point. And so, if you don't have someone dedicated to kind of operationalizing this and being able to make those changes, you can get caught. And when you've got a big site and you've got 90 days to make a change, like what happened with the Canelo ruling earlier in the year, that's a big change to make on a massive amount of websites in a short amount of time.
I want to reiterate very humbly that marketing teams don't know what they don't know in terms of the data that we're touching, apart from also the regulations that are involved. Is there a question a marketing team could ask someone else in the organization to help illuminate? Jeff?
It's tough. I think in general, there's really good tools out there that are available to help you start with the data governance, right? And then there's obviously the compliance issue where you've got companies like Wirewheel, for example, that can help with a lot of these issues. But I think just in general, working as a team and not having privacy just be just a compliance piece, right? But making sure that privacy and marketing are working together. I think that's really the key part there. One of the biggest kind of hiccups I've heard over the last year or so is the marketer tends to feel like privacy is the bottleneck, but privacy is wanting to help marketing. They don't want to be the bottleneck, right? And I think that's the start of the conversation you need to have before you need to worry about who do I need to go to about the different pieces there.
So if I can jump in, I think Jeff, hit a really important point, and I want to just kind of circle back to Ann's comments as well. From my perspective, there's a few things happening at once, and number one is, as Ann was pointing out, there's a lot of different regulatory requirements from different laws. So, as we get ready for 2023, the most important thing is know what the regulatory requirements are for the different laws and be able to articulate those and translate that into what you need, from a budget and resource perspective in order to operationalize compliance with those laws and be able to demonstrate. At the same time, as Jeff was indicating, there's this shift towards more rigorous data governance that really is causing marketing and privacy to collaborate closely. And so often we hear the marketing folks at our clients say, we need this third-party data in order to do X, run these campaigns, grow our revenue, whatever the X is. And privacy is saying, that's great, but there's new added risks involved for using the third-party data. So we just need to think through those risks and deploy the right controls. All that's fine. But in addition to that, what we're seeing is the emergence of what the market is now calling, consent preference management, which is much more than just consent, for online tracking or cookies. What we're seeing is the emergence of or the recognition that consumers, regardless of the data protection law, the commonality is that consumers are being empowered with control over their data. And so what is quickly coming to light is, companies are saying, well, how do we, instead of using, these cookie banner notices as a transparency and consent mechanism, which no one likes, how do we have a different user experience where an individual can understand all of her choices and exercise meaningful control easily over those choices and see what our data use is. And so whether it's through so technology is a huge piece of this, right? So whether it's through Wirewheel's platform or other technology providers that are offering a portal for an individual to see and exercise control over all the different data uses and data collection. We're seeing that come to market very quickly, so that's encouraging. But we're also seeing internally behind the scenes, marketing and other groups starting to look at other data types that they can use to preserve and grow their digital advertising revenue, such as data from what's called zero party data, right? That's data that your customers give you through something like a loyalty program. If you sign up and allow us to do collect your data for this use, and you get X, or first party data, right? Which is companies analyzing and optimizing the data they already collect, or use of what's called second party data, which is licensing data from another company's first party data. We're seeing all of that come into play now because all of those different mechanisms are allowing companies to get better control over their data, streamline their digital advertising supply chain and use this data in a more rigorous way to grow their existing digital advertising. So it's all happening at once. So it's very exciting. But again, it starts with a recognition that we have to we have a regulatory obligation to empower the individual with control over her data. How do we do that?
Right.
And again, that's where WireWheel and other companies have a really important role to play.
Thank you. So, and thanks for the call out. And Jeff and I are proud of the role WireWheel plays in this. But I would like to paint an even more detailed picture of, in the future, what is a customer experience like related to data, and what technology shift, data shift, or mindset shift is going to be hard to get there. How close are we to a potential positive vision, Anne?
How close are we to it? You know, I think that really depends on the what you put into this, right? We talked about before that, you know, you're working with existing systems that may not allow you to give as much preference. So you have to invest that kind of technology to make that happen. But that also has to scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can record a preference in your system, but you know that data is traveling across a vast ecosystem of partners and entities that touch that data. And the question to me is going to be, how are the technology solutions that are coming out in this time going to actually address that, right? Are we going to be able to push that preference through all of the downstream partners that that data currently travels to? So a lot of it is going to be, how can we in an easy way talk about this ecosystem without scaring consumers, but being fair to them, right? Talking to them about how this actually works. So I think it's a long road ahead. Maybe that it's the jaded lawyer in me. But I think it's a long road ahead, but I also think that the conversation is robust at the moment. So we sort of have to distill down to what we think works for our organization, our clients' organizations, and hopefully find the right mix that meets where they're at. Because, you know, some organizations are not ready for that. They just need to start from scratch, right? And so that they may not be ready to ingest something like that into their system. So we actually do have to just take an intentional look at where we're at and what we could do to be incrementally better, and then continue to progress on that path. It's a hard thing to hear, but there needs to be work that goes into this. And in the digital advertising ecosystem, it's way too vast to be able to say that, yes, this technology, this one solution is going to solve for that. I don't think that that's a reality that we're at yet.
I have a hard time imagining one technology solving for this vision, given that, Todd, you shared with me, maybe you can say again, how many billions of dollars move through the system, and there's so many players now. What is your prediction for key players or key technologies or key approaches to solve for consumer privacy, great experience, and the ability for marketers to sell? I hope that's not too hard a question. No,
look, yeah, what do I know? But yeah, I think Anne nailed it, and I'm anxious to hear what Jeff has to say. But I'm actually very bullish on the industry. The industry has always shown that it's resilient, and it is, and it innovates, and it's too much of a powerful economic engine. Digital advertising. I forgot what IAB's last annual report shows. North of $150 billion, year over year, and and even during the pandemic, it's year-over-year growth outpaced most, or at least many other industries in growth. And I think there's something like 20 million people approximately globally working in digital advertising. That number may be off by 1 million or 2, but still it's staggering. So, it's too important to not get it right. The industry is not going to go away. Third-party cookies, the third-party, data industry isn't going to go away, and nor should it. It provides a valuable service. But what I see just kind of peering over the horizon is, an all of the above sort of evolution where companies will evolve their data strategy to encompass not only third-party data, but as I referenced earlier, zero-party data, first-party data, optimizing the data that they collect, second-party data, which is, first-party data from another source, and roll all of that up into, and do analytics on that huge data pool in order to see where they can optimize their digital advertising spend. All at the same time while reaching out to their consumers, their customers, and saying, this is what we're doing. We want to do it the right way. Here's what we're collecting about you. Here's what we know about you. And here's how we're using it. But hey, you're the boss. You exercise control and tell us, how to do it. That's what's coming. And maybe not in 2023, but that's what's coming over the next decade. And, as we mentioned, technology has a really important role, but there's no technology that can provide 100%, that can solve 100% towards this very complex issue. But there's always going to be, people and processes that lay over the technology to support it, to make sure that we're doing this right.
Thank you. Anne, I know you have thoughts on this. And we can, as I said, we would circle back to what is the kind of mindset we can start digging into to get to our future. I'd like you to share on that. And then Jeff, afterwards, mindset / technology moves. And then if we have time, I've got another question from the audience.
From a mindset perspective, I think it's about being intentional with our use of data, right? I think Todd alluded to this earlier, which is, do we need all the data elements that we use to process, right? Are we, with some of the data that's being removed, we're going to be much more intentional on using things like first party data, second zero party data, or whatever that might be. And I think the goal there is to really break down, it's to first understand the process, and make sure you're intentional with that data, the data that comes in from that. Do you know that it's hoovering up this amount of data? And are we needing all of those elements, or are we just hoping that this will come in useful later?
That's a paradigm shift for marketing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also driven by the laws, right? Because you're forced now to articulate the reason why you need to collect certain information and give consumers the option to choose whether they want to share that with you, right? And just to provide the notice, you need to know what you're collecting. And sometimes you may not be so aware of what a pixel on your site is doing and where that data is transmitting. And so being intentional is being, self-aware of how you're interacting with data, so you can be fair to those data that you process, the people's data that you process.
Thank you. Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of technology, where we're going, obviously, I don't want to say the cookie banner's dying, right? But it's going to be less prevalent, right? I mean, there's always going to be cookies. Even if third-party cookies go away, we're still going to have first-party cookies. But in terms of technology, where I see it going is really the data behind it, right? Even if it's consent data, right? It's this idea of a consent profile around a person so you can serve a better experience, right? There's no need for a company to keep bombarding the same person. Do you you consent to analytics if they've already said yes or no somewhere else, right? And so as you can start to provide those better experiences to your customer, to the end consumer, right, it becomes better for them, and then you can start making better choices about the data that you serve them, whether it's advertising or analytics or whatever. And that's kind of the direction I really see it going. I think that's where we'll see a significant shift here, especially as we get closer to 2023. There obviously will be much more to that. I think to Ann's point, I think we're going to see some automation down to third parties, right? If you have a unified consent profile on a known customer, it should be very, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it should be simple to say, stop sending them emails based off their preference choice without having someone, manually go in and update Marketo or Salesforce, right? And I think that's the direction we're going to start to move. And then towards Todd's point, the longer term, technologies we'll get to, on Ad Tech 2.0 and the zero party data.
Thank you. All right. Well, I love how technical your perspective is, Jeff. And I don't know if you are the right one to answer this question from the audience. And before I ask it, I just want to share we have a couple more minutes if anybody else has a question, philosophical or technical, or legal, although we can't offer legal advice, right? Okay. So here's the question. How do you overcome the challenge from GDPR restrictions to host and access data within the EU? Decentralized tech solutions are expensive for brands. So this is obviously a big question. Jeff, do you have a simple answer?
I don't know if I have a simple answer. These were a lot of conversations we've obviously had, right? Obviously finding a provider that stores their data, whether it's cloud data or whatever in the geo or the region that you want is obviously key. But again, not offering legal advice. I know that some of this data transfer can be protected under various measures as well, and that's probably better answered by Todd or Ann.
Hey, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I can't, provide legal advice. I'm in the privacy consulting business. Look, it's a challenge, right? And it goes back to what Ann said is, your intentional use of data. And that really is talking about, what is your data strategy, and, knowing what data you need and how you're using it. And as part of that, the questions or the conversation will also be around, where will you be storing your data? How long will you be keeping retaining your data when when the purpose for which you collected it is satisfied? How will you dispose or, delete the data or get rid of the data? All of those questions are related to that localization concept that's being driven by whether it's the data protection, GDPR, or whether it's by pure play localization laws.
Thank you. Okay, now here's another question that could be answered either from a technical perspective, a philosophical, or legal, and you don't have to answer it from the audience. Since you think cookie banners will be irrelevant in the coming future, and Jeff, you can adjust that language if you'd like, would you suggest that companies set up the cookie consent on their site?
Yeah, so let me clarify from my point of view. Like consent in general will never be irrelevant. I think cookies will be less relevant because at some point, once Chrome finally gets rid of them, right, they will be less important, but there will still be first party cookies. What I would say is the caveat here from a technical point of view is if you're solely relying on cookies as part of cookie consent, and I've always kind of hated the term cookies because it doesn't encompass everything that happens on a website, you already have a huge gap, right? There's plenty of technologies that are transferring data outside of cookies, right? Beacons, pixels, etc. Really, the cookie is just the mechanism for storing the data. It's not actually what's passing the data. So if you're solely relying on just a scanning of cookies as what you're relying, especially like in Europe, you're kind of behind the curve, and most likely you're allowing technologies to fire that should be behind a consent wall that aren't, right? So I would first look at that, and then I would just again say, consent itself is not going away, but the way we look at cookie banners now will change significantly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what it is a lot of people use the cookie banner to achieve their consent. obligations. And that's where cookie banners became annoying and a nuisance. So if you're actually creating the experience, I think that Jeff was referring to, right? You're giving them an experience to be able to express their preference instead of just consenting to cookies or everything else that you've added in that little blurb that you've put in on your cookie banner. You're going to have a much more meaningful way of allowing people to just make the choices about how you use their data. So you can't get away from having to obtain some sort of permission or giving users some type of notice about how you'll use their data. I think what a lot of us are thinking is maybe the cookie banner isn't where that should live. And there's a much more integrated user experience that allows you to make that preference. So even like when Apple was introducing iOS 14, a lot of app developers were developing screens in front of that to sort of inform on that decision, for instance. So I think you can just build a different experience that makes that a little less annoying than the current cookie banners that we have.
Yeah, and more powerful to the consumer. I see Chris. Todd, do you have any last words about cookies or otherwise? Okay.
No, I they both nailed it. Cookie banners are just one vehicle for, being transparent about one particular type of technology that's collecting and transferring data. But again, look for the rise of the consent preference portal, if you will, that may encompass cookie banners in the future. It's coming quickly.
And achieve our goals more deeply. Thank you. Thank you to this panel. I've learned so much. And Chris, I know you have some parting closing words, and looking forward to seeing you all at the next panel. Chris, tell us more about that.
Awesome. Thanks, Cami. I appreciate once again everybody joining. To the panelists and the attendees. So that's going to conclude the session for now. We'd love to see you at the next Spoke session on scaling data rights, which should be starting momentarily. And you can join that directly from the attendee portal page. Thanks a lot.